We will smash the like button on the seas and oceans. We will smash the like button in the fields and the hills. We will subscribe to the channel. We shall never surrender.
Rix is a harsh critic when it comes to a lot of Orwell's attempts at being a novelist.
Oh, well, I'm sure his early works weren't stellar, just like most writers' early works aren't.
Well, my ears perked up because I was not familiar with what Ode to Catalonia and some others, but probably 15 years ago, on the strength of nothing more than he wrote it, I picked up Coming Up for Air, which Rix repeatedly bashes that book. It's unreadable, he calls it. I finished it. It's not memorable, but I finished it. It didn't leave me with anything. There was no great takeaway.
Yeah.
But clearly, it was all building as a novelist. He needed to have something that he was deeply invested in, and that's why 1984 is his masterwork.
But he
And
writes
also,
that
he's
right
a
before,
better essayist. He's a much better essayist.
but he writes 1984 almost like a year or two before he dies, right? It's like,
That's right.
he doesn't die. He doesn't die as an old man either. He dies pretty young, right? Doesn't he die in his 40s?
46, I believe. Quite
Jeez,
young.
That's
Quite young.
not, even at the time, that's very young.
But he had been in ill health for a good part of his adult life, suffering from TB.
The TB and the wound, he always had a raspy voice. They said he always had trouble breathing and that sort of thing, coughed a lot. So here's something that I was interested in. So I know that he doesn't come from the royal, the noble surroundings that Churchill does.
Not an aristocrat.
But it's kind of implied that when he goes on his adventure that he eventually writes about in Down and Out in Paris and London, is that what it's called? London and Paris.
Something like that. But yeah, I know what you mean.
And he tells this wonderful story about the restaurant, which I want to get to, but it sounds like it's not necessary, right? Like that he doesn't have to live with the squalor. He doesn't have to live in the tenements. He doesn't have to live in with the beggars.
It sounds like he has a way out. Yeah, it does. It's like he has options.
But then later in his life, it talks about how he starts to have some success later financially, and he's able to start paying back an anonymous benefactor who had given him some money at some point, like 10 years before that.
Yeah.
So which is it? I don't understand. Is he a struggling writer? I mean, obviously there's a length of time there. It's 20 some years. He could have ebbs and flows in his income, but
and I think
I was slightly confused by that.
I think because this book is fairly brief. I mean, it's 300 plus pages. It's not an autobiography of either of the men. It's really you get just enough background on their personal life to get insight into how they became the persons that they were and why they saw the world in the way that they did and why they took the actions that they did.
Right.
I mean, we could talk for a minute about what's the genesis of the book at all.
Well, that's a really great. I mean, what's the thread here, right? I mean, obviously,
what joins these two men?
The fight for freedom seems to have an indicator. That seems to be an indicator.
It is an indicator. I still think they're an odd pairing.
Me too.
One's a politician, the other one isn't. If you wanted to have a kind of a balancing effect of this or that, you would pit Churchill's liberal opponent in His Majesty's government. But no, he doesn't do that. He picks somebody from a completely different sphere and domain of public life.
Yeah.
How often do you ever compare and contrast a national leader with an author, particularly an author who wasn't even notable when he was alive?
No,
Rick
not
drives
very,
home the
not till the end.
point.
Yeah.
Rick drives home the point again and again that Orwell was really kind of nobody when he was alive. He was a very minor author.
Yeah.
And it's only been posthumously that his reputation has grown and grown and grown.
Yeah.
All through 1984.
That's true. That's very true.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, before we gloss over the restaurant scene,
Yes.
it's kind of a precursor of Bourdain almost. It's like the back of the house, the kitchen confidential kind of thing. And I worked in restaurants as most, that was my career for a long time.
Mhm.
And so I thought it was very interesting to see the contrast when you're talking about class, but this is in Paris. He's talking about, the white linen, the beautiful dining room, and then the squalor right behind the door, and if you had any idea that the dishes were being washed 3 floors down in this dank dungeon of with barely any light and who knows what's scurrying around on the floor, would you really be eating in this in this establishment? But it's so funny because that exists,
Oh,
that exists to this day. It
Of course it
exists,
does. Of course it
you
does.
have,
Some of the fanciest meals are prepared by people who are living on the margins of society.
sure. And people that, the person that's eating the food would probably be loath to associate with,
Absolutely.
outside of any kind of framework that would be outside that restaurant.
Restaurants are an illusion. I mean, it's
Yeah.
a magic show. You're kind of paying to be fooled in a way.
Yeah. Yep. Definitely.
But the thing I wanted to say about the restaurant is that I think 2 things are going on there. One, he identifies with the working class.
Yes.
That's where his sympathies lie. Even if he's not completely part of them, because as you say, it seems as though he has ways to be above that. And the second thing is that it may have also just been a convenient topic because he's a young writer. He's looking for things to write about, and apparently he enjoys social commentary. So this is kind of a natural thing to write about.
It's a good point. It's a really good point. But I think what's interesting is that Rick establishes that he is a champion of the lower classes.
Yeah.
Even though he hates the way they smell. Apparently,
apparently
Orwell is cursed as I am with this incredible sense of smell.
You have this as well.
Unfortunately.
How have I known you for this amount of time and never heard about this?
Well, we've not been in the same city for a long time, so we haven't had those kinds of shared sensory experiences.
Yeah.
But
so there's a word for it, and do you know what the word for it is?
Oh no, I'm not saying I have a medical condition that I'm just saying that I don't think.
Well, we don't know if Orwell had, a clinically diagnosable condition, but he either had a hypersense of smell or he was obsessed with smell. One or the other. Either could be true.
Well, as a writer, it's very challenging to try to describe smell. It's really challenging. And taste is really challenging. But
like 5 words for taste in the English language?
I thought there were 4, but maybe there are 5 now.
No, I think you're right. I think it is just 4.
But I thought also smell is also the same. So
yes.
Smell was acrid, redolent,
yeah.
Pungent.
Yeah.
And I always forget the 4th one.
Yeah.
But I'll remember it in 3:00 in the morning tonight. So
add it below, please.
Put it in the comments for us, guys and gals. Yeah. So it's everything.
It's a tick that he has.
A simile. Everything else is a comparison. So it's like smell like daisies, smell like roses. So.
But that's an interesting thing about language is that this is a tangent. When you think about the dictionary, you really cannot describe any word without using the framework of a bunch of other things that hopefully the reader is familiar with. So it's a ladder. There's no way to. It would be like trying to describe a color to a blind person.
Exactly.
How can you really describe a taste if you've never tasted anything? It's impossible. You must liken it to something else that tastes similar.
Well, that's what I find so fascinating about this is a total tangent. Again, Ken Nordine's colors was that he put to music and lyric poetry a sense of what vermilion was or what aqua was, or olive, and I just thought it was fascinating as an attempt. Who knows if he succeeds or not? I'd have to ask somebody who has that. What's the name of that?
Synesthesia.
Yes. If you're autistic, some people have they hear noises and they see colors.
Yeah, I
Um,
know a woman that I used to work with. I don't know how this conversation came up. She was a synesthete and told me about how words and numbers have colors associated with them in her mind. And it was through that conversation that I realized that I have a form of synesthesia as well. It was something that was just so, it's not something I would even talk about. I mean, it didn't seem, it's just, I can't even describe it in words. It's just part of how you think. So in my case, I've always seen, if I were to count 1, 2, 3, 4 in my mind, I would see the numbers on a line curving through three-dimensional space. And that curve has been exactly the same through my entire life. And
oh,
if I
cool.
go back beyond zero, I can see where that curve leads. So, if I were to describe it to you, zero would be here, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then it would curve, and then you go up to 10, and then you would get up to the teens, and it would go like this, and then it would turn again at 20, dip down, go up towards 30, and then kind of do that.
Now
So that makes no sense.
You studied a few, or you're aware of those numbers in several foreign languages. Does that occur to you when you're counting in French or German?
Yes, yes, it
Yeah.
does. Yeah, and I think that's what would be interesting to know is, does that happen? Would it happen if I were fluent? And I was never fluent in French enough to the point where I wasn't mapping
Right.
one language onto the other.
Right.
Replacing one with two with de.
Right.
If
It's
I
a
became
word for
fluent,
word substitution, right?
Yes, if I began to dream in a foreign language, would it be the same? I may never find out, because I don't think that day's ever going to come.
I've actually dreamt in French. That was funny because that's when I think we had the same professor at one point.
We
Still
did.
Cutting Euro. He actually said to me once, he said, if you start dreaming in French, you're nearing fluency. So that was kind of interesting. But that was
don't bother, because
it was a long time ago. I don't do it anymore.
I was just going to say that what I've heard from many people is that no matter how good your American French becomes, if you go to Paris, they're just going to say, please switch to English. You're hurting my ears.
So that's funny. I was at a wedding in the United States, obviously, but I was at a wedding and I was sat at the Francophone table,
The Francophone table.
Yeah. So my friend was studying French. He was taking classes. We would practice together, and he had his teacher lived in France, and then there were some people who were from France, and we were all at that table. It was a really nice wedding. It was a really nice place. But we were sitting there, and so some of them were speaking French. I was trying to speak in French to them, and blah blah blah. And of course, I'm using probably fourth grade French, vocabulary wise.
Right.
But the one man said to me, "How long did you live in Paris?"
No.
And I said, "I've never been to Paris." And he said, "You have a great Parisian accent."
Wow.
And I just said, I must have had great teachers.
Fantastic.
There's no other way to explain that. But I just we learned Parisian French. We cut the ends off of words because I later, probably 10 or 12 years later, I met someone at the restaurant I worked at, and he was from the south of France. He was from like Bayonne area. Mm-hmm. And he asked me, he was helping me practice. I said, let's speak French. I can practice. It's been a long time. So we were saying things, and he said to me something about bread, but I didn't recognize it because I pronounced it pain, but he pronounced it pain. And I'm like, I don't know what that means. And he's like, and I'm like, pain. And he's like, see, that's Parisian. He's like, but we don't say it that way down here, in the South, we say pen, and he actually says the N.
I'm fascinated by accents. I always have been.
Me too.
I love that kind of stuff because it's so unique and it's so defining, and people love to talk about those differences. I certainly do. And Pittsburgh, of course, has a great accent. It's very distinctive, very unique. Having grown up there, I was, of course, very aware of the accent. But what I didn't know at the time, and what I've realized in my travels since, is that Pittsburgh is the extreme northern end of the Southern American accent.
It's the northernmost city of Appalachia.
Yes, and it has that, the way O's and other vowels are pronounced is extremely Southern. So you would never confuse somebody from Pittsburgh for somebody who's from,
New York.
New Orleans or anywhere like that. But it's where it starts. And the deeper you go, the more it transforms. And also, I will tell you that happens as you go from east to west across Pennsylvania, because the Pennsylvania accent extends into New Jersey. And then it stops somewhere in there and transitions to more of a New York accent. So accents don't respect state borders.
So I have a friend, Brian O'Neill, is a local writer and newspaper reporter, columnist, actually. He wrote a book and he called it The Paris of Appalachia. And that's what he calls.
Interesting.
That's what he calls Pittsburgh. The bridges and, all that sort of thing. And he says, and he's not from Pittsburgh originally, although he's lived here most of his adult life. So it's his adopted city. So I trust that he's, it's not a homegrown pride. It's an acquired pride,
Yeah.
But
I could talk about that all day long, but Philadelphia, it certainly has that Pennsylvania accent, but it's different than Pittsburgh.
Oh, completely. Wooder and daughter. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So that it right away as soon as you hear that, have a glass of water, exactly where you're from.
But people have like this French speaking man from the south of France that you were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
People have such pride in that, and will jokingly say to you, "You're not pronouncing that right." The way I pronounce it is the way it's really pronounced.
Sure. Well, yeah. I mean, after you travel a little bit, you realize that there's no correct pronunciation to anything. But one of the things I did want to, and we're way off topic, but one of the things I did want to talk about was I finally figured out where "red up" came from. That's
oh, really? My family used that all the time.
That's always been considered a Pittsburghism.
Yeah, I think so. It has.
Yeah.
I've never heard it anywhere else.
Well, I found it in writing. It was in Robert Louis Stevenson, the master of ballantrae. Yep. And he says "red up," REDD.
Yeah. Spelled two D's. I know that.
And so it's Scottish. So there were lots of Scots and Scots-Irish who were coal miners in this part of the country. And it makes sense that they would have brought their dialect with them. So
yeah.
And they're right, and they're colloquialisms. So
absolutely. I mean, and Western Pennsylvania, such a conglomeration of European immigrants that have, and of course, there's still distinctive neighborhoods that still exist. So yeah,
to a degree, it's pretty much it's more homogenized now. But yeah. But up until 20 years ago, Polish Hill was still, ethnically.
And I was also thinking of Brookline, which used to have it was like the Italian portion of town.
Well, so was Bloomfield.
Oh, really?
Yeah. In fact, Bloomfield still, they still celebrate that.
Mm-hmm,
but you and I know that was a transient population. There was a lot of college kids that lived there. There were low rental apartments there,
absolutely,
things of that nature. And geographically, it was easy to get to different universities from that area. But
and it's close into the city, and a lot of the populations, their kids all moved out to the suburbs, and it's the story of city. It's a story of cities across America.
Sure. So we're way off.
We got onto this because George Orwell was fascinated with or obsessed with smell.
Oh, right. I forgot.
We're talking about the restaurant. So those were his formative years as a writer. He did not have economic success, and the next big chunk of his life that I recall from the book was he goes to, well, I guess the war had begun, and he goes to work for the BBC as was he an essayist for the BBC? Commentator?
Yeah, something like that.
He wasn't a well-known name. He didn't achieve fame during his time at the BBC.
My writer friends would say he was a hack. Like what he was doing was he was just writing every day, nothing like beautiful, just writing. news stories, informative, about like, events, that kind of stuff.
As Huey Lewis would say, he was working for a living, so he was taking what they were given.
And he would know because his band was called The News.
That's right.
So if you're going to be a news reporter, Huey Lewis is the guy to go to. Huey Lewis, I guess he went to Cornell, right? Is that where his band?
Did he really?
Yeah, I think he did. I don't know if they all graduated. And I think he said something. I remember my friend George, I interviewed George Payson. I interviewed.
Yeah.
And I remember him telling me, he said admiringly, he said to me, he said, I just read that Huey Lewis said, all I remember about college was playing with the band, And it was,
well, if he went to Cornell, that's hard to believe.
I don't know.
We gotta.
I don't know. I think that's what I
post research in the comments.
Yeah, if I'm wrong, call me on it. I have no problem being wrong.
No, I hope.
I love it.
Oh, I hope that's true.
I love being wrong. Just tell me I'm wrong.
I'm married to someone who went to that university.
Yeah.
So
I know. And she got to meet Carl. I met Carl
Sagan.
Just one of my idols from the time I was in 8th grade.
Yeah, that school's a pressure cooker, man. If Huey Lewis went through that school and managed to play in a band and then hit the big time, now I'm super impressed. So here's a tangent for Huey Lewis. That's a band I forgot about, but in the last couple of weeks, it's like plate of shrimp. All of a sudden, his name has been coming out of nowhere, and I saw one of his videos recently, and I've heard a couple of his songs on Sirius XM, and I said, Huey Lewis and there's kind of like a punchline and jokes about the 80s, but these guys were like hit machines. After the other. So that's some talent. You don't just produce like 5 super big songs in a row like that. They had something going.
It's pretty catchy, See,
and I will, for that reason, I will even defend Barry Manilow because he's a punchline. That guy made a ton of money because he sold a lot of records. He wrote songs you never even thought about. Well, he was a jingle writer.
He did. He wrote a lot of jingles that nobody knows about. He wrote like State Farm or Nationwide. He wrote like all kinds of crazy stuff,
But if you can have like 20 hit songs in a particular decade, you got to respect that.
Dude, if you look at the playlist, the track list for sports, right? 1983. 5 of them were like top 20 songs. Right. I think 5, at least.
Was
4.
That his debut album? Was that a debut effort?
No, it wasn't their debut album. There was one before that. I think it was at least their second, but I may have been their third. But yeah, it was, put that in the comments below. But it's Heart and Soul. I Want a New Drug. Don't tell me.
I'm not gonna, because I can't name them.
Okay. Well, I used to be able to name.
First, we would know all of them.
That was embarrassing. I'm going to cut that out. So
cut that out. But they're good. They're good songs. They're excellent.
They are good songs. Yeah. They all sound alike, but they're good. That was the 80s, man. That's what you did.
Here's the thing.
You had a theme. Your album sounded good. It had the same sound from beginning to end.
This is what I say about Paul McCartney. He's got a lot of detractors. That he wrote a lot of silly songs after the Beatles, but he wrote a lot of silly songs when he was with the Beatles. Nothing.
He even
really
wrote
changed.
A song called Silly Songs.
Silly love songs. The only thing that changed was that he wasn't co-writing with Lennon anymore. But here's the thing you got to give him. A lot of his songs were incredibly silly, catchy, beat, hummable. You remembered them. You wanted to hear them again. That's all I got to say about that.
I'm with you there. It's hard to I don't take sides when it comes to Lennon and McCartney. I don't. I love them all. I love Harrison. I thought Ringo had some really great songs. They're real funny. They're fun. You can
Ringo has a sense of humor. That's
what exactly.
He's like easygoing. He doesn't take himself seriously.
No. Yeah, life is fun. Let's have fun. I want to be under the sea in an octopus's garden in the shade.
We're all in a yellow submarine.
Whatever that means.
What the hell's that?
Yeah, and George has that kind of Eastern hippie influence, sitars and stuff, and I'm cool with all that. It's not my kind of music, but I'm down with it. I can listen to it. It's okay. Yeah. But McCartney, he had me because the very first James Bond movie I ever saw was Live and Let Die.
Yeah.
Because just what my age and when I saw I was permitted to see, a James Bond movie edited for TV, of course,
Well, but it had Jane Seymour.
Yeah. I mean, how could you not? Solitaire, man. Come on.
Yeah. That used to be one of my
Roger
favorites.
Stacked the deck, by the way, guys. They were
used to be one
all
of my
the
favorite
lovers. Any
Yeah.
cards she picked would have been the lovers.
I know.
Yes, I learned about that. I learned about card stacking. I learned a lot. James Bond taught me a lot. So much to my chagrin, probably. But back to the book.